Brazil has announced its inflation figures for the month of July, and they're coming in at the lowest inflation Brazil has seen for a single month since 1980. That's what we're talking about today. Let's get straight to it. Hello and welcome to another Brazil Live video from the Brazilian Report. I'm Ewan Marshall, the editor of the Brazilian Report, and I'm gladly here today with our editor-in-chief, Gustavo Ribeiro. How are you, Gustavo?
Hey, Ewan, how are you?
Excellent. And as we said at the very start of the video, we're going to be discussing the latest on Brazil's inflation results. But before we get into that, just like to give a quick plug for the Brazilian Report, which is the journalistic engine behind these videos and our Explaining Brazil podcast, lots of other stuff. And the Brazilian Report is a subscription-based business model. So we rely on your support and on your membership. So please do check us out at Brazilian.report. We've got lots of stuff there on Brazil and on Latin America. And check out our subscription plans. They're, inexpensive. We've definitely got this stuff to suit you. So have a look there and see what fits you best. And so let's just get on with this today, Gustavo. Brazil obviously has announced its latest inflation figures. Tell us more about that. What's the figures and why is it important?
So Brazil's official statistics agency released the numbers of minus 0.68% for inflation. So it means we're having deflation. Prices are going down, actually. And it's the first time that has happened in 26 months. And like you said, the lowest number ever. If you think about it, 0.68% is not that much for the lowest number ever. So it tells you a little bit about Brazil's relationship with inflation. We are seeing that the effects of actually two main things. One is the central bank's pretty strong efforts to tame inflation by raising interest rates. What it actually does is it makes the cost of borrowing money more expensive. So it tends to tame inflation because it cools off the economy. Fewer people are buying goods because the access to credit becomes more restricted, and then prices go down as a byproduct of that. And Brazil had, especially in 2021, one of the most hawkish central banks in the world. Our benchmark interest rates went from 2%, which was the all-time low, to 13.75% now. The latest bump happened last week. And then the other main reason for that deflation to have happened is the government's efforts to lower prices, especially energy prices. And Jair Bolsonaro has, for several weeks, for the past couple of months, tried to force state administrations into capping state-level taxes on fuels. He has enacted several moves to reduce the prices of utilities. So these are the main drivers of the inflation numbers we have seen today. We saw gasoline and ethanol prices being the biggest deflation drivers this month. Now, the problem with these sort of overall inflation numbers is that they can be misleading because, my inflation for me doesn't mean necessarily what inflation means to you because we don't necessarily buy the same stuff. So deflation for some doesn't necessarily mean that prices are going down for others.
And it's just interesting if we quickly touch on this before we go into the kind of political context behind this. But just the word deflation, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? What exactly does deflation mean in an economic context?
It depends, right? There's good. I have read economists talking that there's good inflation, good deflation, bad deflation. It all depends what is causing it, for how long. Usually, if prices are going momentarily down because either there is a big hike in supply because maybe productivity issues that companies are going more productive, that they are being able to to have higher output, then it's not necessarily a bad thing. If it is a byproduct of the economy cooling down and towards recession, then it becomes a different problem.
And so this, as you mentioned, I mean, this is the first time we've had deflation in Brazil for a long time. Never mind being it's the first, it's the largest deflation Brazil has had month to month in since 1980. But with this coming now, we've only got a couple of months until presidential elections. So this must be important, right? This must have an impact on the electoral outlook, right?
Yes, because I mean, family purchasing power has gone down in Brazil for several years now, especially since the 2014-2016 recession, which was the worst on record for Brazil until the pandemic hit. And since then, the Brazilian economy has not been able to fully recover. So this has been an ongoing process. And with the latest inflationary process, things have gone much worse. Now, it is complicated to measure exactly how much the government is going to benefit from it. As we have mentioned on the Brazilian report several times, in Brazil, I mean, everywhere, but in a country as unequal and with a rate of vulnerable people in its population as big as Brazil, presidential popularity goes hand in hand with economic expectations. So if people believe the economy is improving, then the president will reap the benefits, even if they are not necessarily the reason for that. And if the economy is tanking, then the president grows unpopular, even if they are not the only person to be blamed about it. We have seen a major dip in fuel prices. So fuels are not necessarily the best gauge of economic health and activity, but because they are so ubiquitous, people tend to see them as a sort of shorthand for how the economy is doing, for how inflation in general is doing. So that can have a good effect for President Bolsonaro. However, most Brazilian voters are either poor or lower middle class. I mean, they're not necessarily well off. And the Brazilian president will have to cater to these voters in order to pull an upset and win against former President Lula, who is leading all the polls. For these people, then, like I was saying, inflation means different things for different people. For poor voters, they're not necessarily experiencing deflation as richer consumers who depend more on their own cars. That's because food prices remain really high. We have published on the Brazilian report that, for instance, the prices for coffee in 12 months has gone up 58%. Milk has gone up by 41%. And people are, we have written about how shopping carts are changing. People are getting lower quality substitutes for milk. How do you call in English the soro de leite?
Yeah, it's like they're selling liquid whey. And it's the thing is that's so amazing about this is that it's packaged in the exact same way as milk cartons. So it's very easy to kind of mistake it for milk when it is only essentially like half of milk.
Yeah, and I mean, right next to the regular milk cartons, it's not by coincidence. I would dare to say.
Okay, so yeah, I think we should start to get into some of these, some of these different sectors that have been affected by these latest inflation figures. But just first, while we're in the middle of this, let's just another quick plug for the Brazilian report. As I mentioned at the start, it's the journalistic engine behind these videos and our Explaining Brazil podcast. And as I mentioned before, we work on subscriptions, but also if you've already subscribed and you want to support us further, or maybe you don't want to subscribe, but you want to find a way to help us out, to fuel our work, you can support us on Buy Me a Coffee, and that'll allow you to buy between 1 to 5 cups of coffee to support our journalists, to keep us awake and alert and, you know, hungry to publish the latest news in Brazil and Latin America. And we also have a special Buy Me a Coffee membership service where you sign up every month. You give a donation of coffees every month, and it gives you access to a bunch of, you know, exclusive content. We've got different newsletters, we've got kind of behind the scenes info, and you get a lot more kind of contact with us as a team.
You get to see how the sausage is done, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's not as ugly as you'd think. We're actually, we do things quite well. So yeah, check that out. That's Buy Me a Coffee / Brazilian Report. Please check that out. And so yeah, let's just get back to this then. So as you mentioned, we've got fuels on one hand. I mean, they've seen massive kind of deflation, but on the other hand, we also have food prices, which, you know, have just consistently been really quite high for quite a while. And these items like milk and coffee, you know, it's really starting to weigh on the average pockets.
And that's why, even if we have seen deflation and the lowest number month to month for overall inflation, 12-month inflation rate in Brazil remains above the 10% mark, is actually 10.07%. So prices are not going up, but I mean, they have been going up very fast for quite a while, right?
Yeah. And I mean, what else then can we look at from today's figures? What other sectors kind of jump out at you as perhaps maybe prices going down or the prices going up? You know, what's really relevant from today's announcement?
So besides food prices, which have gone up much faster than overall inflation, one thing that we have pointed out on the Brazilian report is services inflation. And the numbers are really interesting because it shows on one side is actually a reflection of the reopening of the economy. We had the Omicron variant at the beginning of the year, which really disrupted economic activity in Brazil. A lot of cities reenacted restrictions. These restrictions have since been lifted, and we are seeing more people dining out, more people traveling. But then these services the prices for them are going through the roof. I mean, I don't know. You're due for vacation just at the end of the year. But if you're looking to travel for a weekend, I mean, tourism packages have gone up by 2.7% in July alone. Nightclubs have gone up by 2.6%. Hotels 2.4%. So I mean, the 12-month services inflation was at 1.44% in April 2021, and it is now at 8.87%. So it shows this continuous trend of services becoming more and more expensive. And if you're planning on traveling, airfares have never been, for more than a decade, they haven't been this expensive. If you're renting a car, it has never been so expensive. So, I mean, everything that you're doing in terms of services is becoming more and more prohibitive for a lot of Brazilians.
Yeah, I mean, put it this way, if I was to book my end of year holidays now, which I booked earlier in the year, I probably wouldn't be able to afford them as far as the prices have gone up. So Gustavo, you mentioned there this kind of consistent trend when we look at services inflation, but what about the overall trends? Where's inflation going from here? Is this just a little blip of deflation? Are we going to go back to, you know, the prices rising month upon month, or is this, you know, maybe something a bit more consistent?
No, it's interesting because in 2021, every time we had a new inflation reading, we had this throngs of economists saying, now inflation has peaked. Okay, now it has peaked. All right, no, I think it's this time around. So apparently, if we look at some trends, we could say inflation has peaked. And the trend that most economists are pointing out is that we're going to see prices going down for the next 2 or 3 months. For instance, year-end inflation forecasts have by markets that are market institutions that are surveyed weekly by the central bank. The median forecast for year-end inflation in June, early in June, was at 8.9%. It's now at 7.11%. However, projections for next year have gone up for 17 straight weeks. And for instance, in March, people thought that inflation would close 2023 at 3.5%. And now they believe it's going to be at 5.3%, which means that, yes, inflation will not be as scorching as it is today, but prices are kind of stabilizing or going up a little bit more slower, but coming from a very high starting point.
So more like a kind of disinflation rather than deflation, I suppose.
Yeah.
But
like
yeah,
good and bad are absolute concepts, right? Better and worse are relative. So inflation is getting better. It doesn't mean it's good.
Perfect. Okay, I think we'll leave that there then. Excellent, Gustavo. Thank you very much. A very enlightening discussion on Brazilian inflation. And yeah, so thanks for watching, everybody. This was another video from another Brazil live video from the Brazilian Report. Remember to check us out at Brazilian.report. That's the journalistic engine behind this video, our Explaining Brazil podcast, all of our presence on social media. We'll hope to see you there. And we'll be back again soon with another Brazil live video. Thank you very much for watching. Good night.